September 14, 2019. 6:47 inches the morning. The temperature at the Shoshone Lake Trailhead in Yellowstone National Park was 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold enough that every breath became fog. Cold enough that the frost on the lodgepole pines caught the first light, like broken glass, beautiful and completely indifferent to the woman standing at the trailhead register, signing her name. Her name was Mara Calloway, 26 years old, an environmental science graduate student from Missoula, Montana, smart, careful, the kind of person who double-checked her permit before the ranger could hand it back. She had a red 4-5-liter pack, 3 days of rations, a trail journal with a cracked spine from overuse, and mounted to her left shoulder strap a GoPro Hero 7 Black, red light blinking, already recording. She signed in at 6:51 a.m. She never signed out. By the following nightfall, a search and rescue team of 34 people was moving through the backcountry in the dark, calling her name into 2.2 million acres of silence. They found nothing, not then. 5 years later, a hiker on a route that doesn't appear in any guidebook reached down into the silt on the eastern shore of Shoshone Lake and pulled something out of the mud, something small, black, fractured, still sealed. And what was on that memory card, the last 4 minutes especially, is something that federal investigators have still not been able to explain. This video contains dramatized and fictionalized elements created for storytelling purposes only. Names, dates, locations, and specific details have been changed or invented. This is not a factual news report. To understand what happened to Mara Calloway, you have to understand who she was before she disappeared. Because she was not lost. That is the word that gets used in cases like this, lost. It implies carelessness. It implies someone who wandered off a path, didn't bring a map, underestimated the terrain. Mara Calloway was none of those things. She had grown up in Billings, Montana, middle child of 3, raised by her mother, Diane, a high school biology teacher, and her father, Robert, who worked pipeline maintenance and spent his weekends teaching his kids to read topographic maps, like most parents teach their kids to read bedtime stories. Mara had been hiking backcountry trails since she was 9 years old. By 16, she was leading groups. By 22, she had completed 2 solo multi-day routes in Glacier National Park without incident. She wasn't reckless, she was exactly the opposite. She enrolled at the University of Montana on a partial academic scholarship, and by her second year of graduate school, she had narrowed her research focus to something most people wouldn't find glamorous, the microscopic life that survives inside Yellowstone's hydrothermal vent systems, organisms called extremophiles. Bacteria and archaea that live in conditions that should, by every biological logic, kill them. Boiling water, high acidity, near-zero oxygen, and yet they're there, thriving, adapting, in some cases producing compounds that have no known equivalent in nature. Mara believed that the Shoshone Lake hydrothermal basin contained vent sites that had never been formally cataloged. Sites where the subsurface thermal activity was different, layered in a way that created microenvironments the NPS survey data simply hadn't captured. Her thesis was titled Subsurface Thermal Stratification and Novel Extremophile Distribution in the Shoshone Lake Hydrothermal System. It was registered under University of Montana Graduate Research, file number ENVGT 20190088. Her advisor on that file was Dr. Glenn Patchett. We'll come back to Dr. Patchett. Mara's younger sister, Kayla, now 31, spoke about her in a recorded interview conducted in the fall of 2024. She described Mara as methodical, private, someone who felt most like herself when she was in the field, knee-deep, in water, narrating temperature readings into a camera. She gave herself the GoPro as a birthday present that August, Kayla said. She said it was for the thesis she needed a hands-free recording option, but I think she also just wanted to remember everything. She always wanted to remember everything. The trip Mara was taking on September 14th had been planned for 6 months. She had filed the correct permits, coordinated a satellite messenger check-in schedule with Dr. Patchett, and briefed her mother on her full route. The night before she left, she called Diane. Diane Calloway has described that call in every interview she has given in the years since. She describes it the same way every time. She sounded excited. That's what I keep coming back to. She wasn't scared, she was excited. She said, "Mom, I think this is it. I think this is the data that makes the whole thesis." And I told her to be careful, and she laughed. And that was the last time I heard her laugh like that. 2 days before she left, Mara made an entry in her trail journal. Investigators would later recover this journal from her pack. The journal had survived 5 years of exposure, battered, stained, partially water damaged. Most entries were technical: water temperatures, sample coordinates, equipment notes. But the final entry, dated September 12, 2019, was different. It read, "The existing NPS thermal survey is incomplete. I think I know why, and I think I know where to look." She put the journal in her pack. She laid out her gear on the trunk of her 2014 Subaru Outback. She checked it all, repacked it, drove north toward Yellowstone in the dark. By every measure available, Mara Calloway was prepared for what she was walking into. What she was not prepared for was what was already waiting. The morning of September 14th, 2019, began the way most days in Yellowstone's backcountry begin in early fall. Quiet, cold. The kind of cold that doesn't announce itself, it just settles into your joints and stays there. Mara arrived at the Shoshone Lake Trailhead parking lot at 6:47 a.m. A retired couple from Flagstaff, Arizona, Gerald and Patrice Odom, who were in the park for their 40th wedding anniversary, were in the lot at the same time, preparing for a day hike on the Lewis Channel Trail. Gerald Odom later gave a statement to NPS investigators. He said, "She was organized, like unusually organized. She laid everything out on her trunk lid, checked it all off a list, packed it back in. I remember pointing her out to Patrice and saying, 'That girl knows exactly what she's doing.'" At 6:51 a.m., Mara signed the backcountry permit register at the trailhead kiosk. The ranger on duty that morning was James Tolliver, a 12-year NPS veteran assigned to the Canyon and Lake District. Tolliver's post-incident statement, filed under NPS Ranger Field Report YNPIR 20191-409 on September 15th, includes a detail that investigators would later return to repeatedly. He wrote, "Permit holder Calloway asked about thermal activity near the southeast shore, specifically whether any new vent formations had been reported in the last survey cycle. I told her to stay on the established trail." She nodded. But the way she nodded, it was like she'd already decided something, and she was just being polite. At 8:30 a.m., confirmed by GoPro timestamp, Mara reached the first major waypoint on the Shoshone Lake Trail. A ridgeline overlook, approximately 4.2 miles from the trailhead, known informally among backcountry regulars as Ridgeline Break. From here, on a clear morning, you can see the full expanse of Shoshone Lake below the largest backcountry lake in the entire lower 48 states, sitting at nearly 8,000 feet elevation, surrounded by thermal vents that hiss and bubble along the shoreline like something alive. Mara filmed it. 4 minutes of footage. Her voice calm and precise, narrating the water temperature reading she was getting from the inlet below. The GoPro's red indicator light blinked steadily in the cold air. She was in a good mood. At approximately 11:15 a.m., 2 backpackers heading in the opposite direction encountered her near the lake's north inlet. Travis Welch, 29, and Donnie Ferris, 27, both from Salt Lake City, both experienced backcountry hikers, later gave statements to search and rescue. Travis recalled, "She was moving fast for someone carrying field equipment. We said hello. She waved, but she didn't stop. The camera was on her strap. The little red light was going." That was the last time anyone outside of this case would confirm seeing Mara Calloway alive and in motion. What happened between 11:15 a.m. and 2 p.m. is known only through the GoPro footage, and only partially. What forensic GPS reconstruction of her boot prints would later establish pieced together over weeks of fieldwork by NPS Investigative Services branch analysts is that at approximately 1:17 p.m., Mara's path diverged from the established Shoshone Lake Trail. Not by accident, the deviation is deliberate. The prints move southeast with purpose, navigating around a thermal drainage field, following what appears to be a natural game trail through a dense lodgepole stand. She was going somewhere specific. At 2:09 p.m. GoPro timestamp, confirmed Mara's footage, records a moment her thesis had been building toward for months. She is standing at the edge of a secondary thermal cluster, approximately 1.3 miles southeast of the trail, in terrain that does not appear on any publicly available NPS map. The ground is pale and mineral-crusted. Steam rises from multiple small vents. The air smells. Her voice describes it clearly on camera like sulfur and something metallic. Like copper pennies left in warm water. She films one vent in particular for 4 uninterrupted minutes. Her voice is barely above a whisper. Unmarked secondary vent east of the primary cluster. This isn't in the NPS survey data. The stratification pattern is completely different. The crust formation suggests this has been active for significantly longer. I'm flagging this orange flag. I'm calling it Vent 4C. She plants an orange trail flag in the mineral-crusted ground. At 2:17 p.m., the GoPro footage stops. Not a battery failure. The battery had been at 78% at last check. Not an accident. A deliberate stop. That evening, Mara was due to make a satellite messenger check-in with Dr. Glenn Patchett at 7 p.m. The check-in did not come. Patchett waited 2 hours. Then he called NPS dispatch at 9:03 p.m. In the parking lot, under the cold, dark sky, Mara's Subaru Outback sat exactly where she had left it. Keys on the seat. Engine cold. Her permit was still open. And somewhere out in 2.2 million acres of wilderness, the GoPro was still with her. By 10 p.m. on September 15th, Mara Calloway had been missing for at least 8 hours, possibly more. The temperature was dropping toward 24 degrees. The park was dark in a way that cities never get dark, a total geological darkness broken only by the pale steam rising from the thermal fields. The ranger who took Patchett's call would later say, "When someone doesn't come back in Yellowstone's backcountry, you have a window. You always have a window. After 48 hours in those conditions, that window changes." The window was already closing. At 6 a.m. on September 16, 2019, the National Park Service formally activated search and rescue operations under case number NPSS AR2019Y NP0916MC. 34 people, 2K, 9 units, 1 contract helicopter. The morning was 29 degrees Fahrenheit. A low mist sat over the Shoshone Lake Basin, dense enough that the helicopter A. Bell 206, operated by Yellowstone Aviation Services, was grounded for the first 4 hours of the operation. The pilots sat in the parking lot drinking coffee in the dark, watching the sky, waiting for the ceiling to lift. On the ground, the K-9 teams moved first. Both dogs were Belgian Malinois, working line search animals with hundreds of confirmed field hours between them. Their handler, a Teton County SAR coordinator named Beth Halverson, had worked missing persons operations in the greater Yellowstone area for 11 years. The dogs picked up a scent trail almost immediately. It moved south from the trailhead, then southeast, through the lodgepole stand, across the thermal drainage field, toward the vent cluster. And then, at the edge of a pale mineral flat, approximately 1.4 miles off trail, both dogs stopped. They didn't alert. They didn't bark. They didn't indicate a find in either direction, not a live find, not a deceased find. They simply stopped and whined. Beth Halverson would later describe this moment in a recorded deposition as one of the most unusual experiences of her career. In 11 years, I've never had both dogs stop at the same time, in the same place, with no indication. They weren't confused. They weren't distracted. They were refusing. That's the only word I have for it. They knew something was there, and they wouldn't go further. The scent trail ended at the mineral flat. Beyond it, nothing. As if Mara Calloway had simply ceased to leave a trace on the physical world. According to the Search and Rescue After Action Report, filed under NPS document SAR-AAR 201-90918, grid sweeps were conducted over the following 72 hours across an area of approximately 140 square miles. The helicopter, once airborne, flew 16 hours of search pattern on the first day alone. Volunteer ground teams covered every established trail route, every known water source, every campsite within the search radius. They found nothing. On the second day, September 17th, a volunteer searcher named Brad Coletti, a structural engineer from Bozeman who had joined the SAR effort through a mutual aid call-out, was working a grid section approximately 400 meters north of the vent cluster site. Moving slowly through dense undergrowth, using a walking pole to push branches aside, he almost walked past it. A single latex nitrile glove, blue, snagged on a lodgepole branch at shoulder height as if it had been caught mid-motion, as if someone moving quickly had pulled their hand free and kept going. Inside the glove, a torn fragment of paper. A field data sheet. Mara's handwriting confirmed later by forensic document analysis. Partially legible, water-stained at the edges. And reading, in the fragment that remained, Vent 4C. Not on any map. Do not. The sentence ended there. The glove and fragment were bagged and logged as Evidence Item 3 under NPS Investigative Services. Branch File Y, NPIS, B2019EV0042. They were sent to the ISB Regional Office in Denver for analysis. The full content of that fragment, if more was recovered through forensic enhancement, has never been publicly disclosed. A FOIA request filed by private investigator Frank Dessler in 2021 was denied on the grounds of active federal investigation. As of the time of this video, that denial stands. On the 9th day, the aerial search was suspended due to weather. On the 11th day, the ground operation was formally stood down. 34 searchers, 126 person-hours in the field. No trace of Mara Calloway beyond a boot print, a glove, and an unfinished sentence. The NPS Investigative Services Branch classified the case under Status Code 3, Unexplained Disappearance, Active Investigation. Dr. Glenn Patchett was interviewed twice during the search period. He was cooperative, visibly distressed, according to interviewing officers. He submitted voluntarily to a polygraph examination. He passed. The ISB noted him as Eliminated Person of Interest Classification, Phase 1. And then, silence. For years, the park kept breathing, the thermal vents kept hissing. The orange trail flag Mara had planted at Vent 4C stood in the wind, marking nothing for no one. In terrain no one was permitted to enter. And the GoPro evidence item 1 on the NPS ISB case inventory, serial number GP7B441-97823, was listed as missing, but not forever. The first year after a person disappears, the investigators will tell you, is the year of action. The phones ring, the leads come in. The family holds vigils and hands out flyers and believes, with a ferocity that sustains them, that someone somewhere knows something and that the truth is close enough to touch. The second year is harder. The third year is different in a way that's difficult to describe. It's not despair exactly. It's something quieter, something more permanent. The shape of a person-sized absence that has been there long enough that you've learned to move around it. For the Calloway family, those years were all of this and more. In the spring of 2020, Diane Calloway hired a private investigator. His name was Frank Dessler, 61 years old, a former FBI missing persons analyst who had spent 22 years in the Bureau's Salt Lake City field office before retiring and going independent. He was not cheap. He communicated in bullet points, and he had a completion rate on cold cases that Diane described as the only reason she trusted him. Dessler re-interviewed every available witness from the original investigation. He revisited the evidence log. He filed records requests. And within his first 90 days on the case, he developed a theory not about an accident, not about a predator, but about the data, about what Mara had found at Vent 4C, and about who else might have known she'd found it. In 2021, Dessler filed a FOIA request for the complete content of the recovered data fragment. Evidence Item 3, denied. He filed an appeal, denied again. He made contact with 2 former NPS survey geologists and asked them, off the record, whether an unmapped secondary vent in the Shoshone Lake southeastern basin was plausible. Both said yes. One of them, who declined to be named, added something that Dessler recorded in his case notes, later obtained by investigators in 2024. He said, "If someone found a vent system in that area with the stratification profile your client was describing, that would be significant, scientifically, and depending on the extraction potential, commercially." Meanwhile, Kayla Calloway launched a social media awareness campaign. She called it Find Mara. Within 18 months, the page had 180,000 followers. Tips came in dozens, then hundreds. People who had been in Yellowstone that September. People who had seen a woman matching Mara's description. People with theories, information, confessions even. Every single one was followed up. Not one was verifiable. In the fall of 2022, 3 years after Mara vanished, the FBI formally took over the case from the NPS Investigative Services Branch. It was transferred to the Cold Case Unit at the Salt Lake City Field Office under FBI Case Reference CCU 2022114MC. The assigned agent was Special Agent Donna Lark, badge 7741. A 15-year Bureau veteran with a specific background in missing persons investigations with potential financial crimes overlap. And the GoPro Evidence Item 1 was formally reclassified from Missing Physical Evidence to Evidence Presumed Destroyed. Somewhere in the FBI's Salt Lake field office, Agent Lark pinned that reclassification memo above her desk. And next to the word destroyed, she drew a question mark in blue ink. She would later say, in a deposition, that she drew it because she didn't believe it, that the camera's waterproof casing had been tested to withstand submersion up to 196 feet. That presumed destroyed was, in her professional assessment, presumed convenient. In the summer of 2023, 4 years in something arrived at the Calloway family's attorney's office that made every investigator on the case sit up straight. A postcard, mailed from Bozeman, Montana, no return address. Plain white card, block printed in black ink. It read, "She saw Vent 4C. So did he." 6 words. The postcard was immediately transferred to the FBI. Forensic analysis found no usable fingerprints. DNA recovery from the envelope seal yielded one partial genetic profile unknown, not present in the CODIS National Database. The postmark was genuine, Bozeman, MT, June 11, 2023. Agent Lark described the postcard in her case notes as the most significant development in the investigation in 4 years. It was filed. No public announcement was made. The 4th anniversary vigil at the Shoshone Lake trailhead drew 67 people on a cold September evening. Diane Calloway stood at the register kiosk, the same one where her daughter had signed her name, and spoke for 4 minutes. She said, "I don't believe she's dead. I've never believed that. I know what people think about that. I know what the statistics say. But I know my daughter. And somewhere she is trying to find her way back." She was right. She just didn't know that by the time she said those words, Mara had already been found. She just hadn't been identified yet. Nobody knew that 40 miles away in a regional medical center in Bozeman, Montana, a woman who didn't know her own name was slowly, painfully trying to remember it. Before we go any further, if this story has kept you watching this far, hit that subscribe button right now, because what we are about to reveal is the part that investigators still cannot explain. July 19, 2024. A wildlife photographer named Cole Maddox, 31 years old, from Denver, Colorado, was on day 5 of a 6-day solo backcountry loop through Yellowstone's remote southeastern quadrant. It was a route he had mapped himself, not from any guidebook, not from any NPS-recommended trail system. Just topographic maps, satellite imagery, and the kind of obsessive backcountry planning that serious wilderness photographers develop over years. The morning was warm for Yellowstone, 61 degrees by 9 a.m. The lake was flat. The air above the water was hazy with humidity and faint sulfur, the way it always is along that shoreline, and the light was the kind of light photographers will walk 6 days into a wilderness to find. Cole was moving along the eastern shore of Shoshone Lake, picking his way through sedge grass and loose mineral sediment when he saw it, half buried, at the water's edge. A rectangular black object. He thought at first it was a piece of old camping equipment. Trash, maybe the kind of thing that gets carried in by a flood season and left behind when the water recedes. He crouched down to look at it without touching it. The casing was fractured along one corner. It was covered in 5 years of lake moss, mineral deposits from the thermal saturated water, and a faint white crust of dissolved silica that had slowly, over a very long time, started to encase it. But the shape was unmistakable. The mount bracket, the shoulder strap clip. He knew exactly what he was looking at. Cole Maddox photographed the object in situ, 4 images from different angles, careful not to disturb its position. Then he lifted it with both hands. In a recorded interview conducted 3 weeks later, he described the moment this way. The weird part was, it was warm, not from the sun. The sun wasn't hitting that spot. I don't know how else to explain it. The ground around it was cool, the water was cold. But the camera itself was just warm. I held it for a second, and then I set it down, and I got my satellite communicator out. Because whatever this was, it wasn't mine to take. He called NPS dispatch at 11:33 a.m. Within 48 hours, the serial number partially obscured by mineral deposits. Recovered through careful laboratory cleaning at the NPS Investigative Services branch facility in Denver, was cross-referenced against the active evidence inventory. GP7, B44197823. An exact match. The GoPro Hero 7 Black that had been listed as evidence item 1-inch the disappearance of Mara Calloway. The camera that had been on her shoulder strap at 11:15 a.m. on September 14, 2019, when Travis Welch saw the red light blinking. The camera that had been reclassified as presumed destroyed. It wasn't destroyed. It had been waiting. The following morning, July 20th, NPS investigators, accompanied by an FBI field representative, conducted a full site survey of the recovery area. Approximately 200 meters from the GoPro recovery point, at the edge of a patch of soft thermal sediment, partially sheltered by an overhanging rock shelf, they found something that stopped the survey team in its tracks. A partial boot print. Fresh, less than 72 hours old. Consistent with a women's size 8 trail boot, pressed cleanly into the pale sediment, pointing toward the lake. Someone had been here recently. The print was photographed, cast, and submitted under recovery log YNPREC 202-40719GC. GPS coordinates of the recovery site: 44.2917 degrees north, 110.6584 degrees west, approximately 1.9 miles east-southeast of the Shoshone Lake Trail, a location that appears on no publicly available map. 3 days after the GoPro was recovered, a call came in to the FBI Salt Lake City field office. The operator who took the call noted that the caller's voice was female, calm. The connection was clear. She did not give a name. She said 5 words: "I know you found it." Then she ended the call. Agent Donna Lark was in the building. She was briefed within the hour. She pulled the call log and read the transcript twice. Then she pulled the Calloway case file, and she started making calls. But the real horror wasn't where the camera was found. It was what was still on the card inside it. To understand the next part of this story, we need to go back 14 months before the GoPro was recovered. May 12, 2023. A ranch hand named Elroy Sims was driving a 2-lane highway outside Gardiner, Montana, a small town that sits at Yellowstone's northern entrance, approximately 52 miles from the Shoshone Lake trailhead, at approximately 5:40 inches the morning, heading toward a property where he worked a fence crew. He saw a figure on the side of the road. A woman. Walking slowly, barefoot on the gravel shoulder. She was wearing a long-sleeved thermal base layer and trail pants. Both faded, both filthy, both at least one size too large for her body. She was not carrying anything. She did not react to his headlights until he stopped the truck approximately 20 feet ahead of her and got out. He would later tell investigators, "She looked at me like she was trying to remember what a person was." He called 911 at 5:44 a.m. She was transported by ambulance to St. Bridget's Regional Medical Center in Bozeman, arriving at 7:12 a.m. Intake was handled by the overnight resident on call, with the attending physician, Dr. Faye Okoye, M.D., 12 years of internal medicine and emergency trauma, reviewing the case at 8:30 a.m. The intake record filed under St. Bridget's admission number, SBRMCJD 202-30512, describes the patient as female, approximate age mid to late 20s. Unable to confirm identity, vitals on arrival, heart rate 48, blood pressure 88/54, body temperature 96.2 degrees Fahrenheit, borderline hypothermic. Weight on admission, 91 pounds. 91 pounds. Imagine waking up and not knowing your own name. Imagine sitting in a hospital bed under fluorescent lights and being asked the simplest question a human being can be asked, "What is your name?" and having the answer simply not be there, not locked, not hidden, just absent, like a room where a wall used to be. Dr. Okoye's clinical notes from the initial assessment, partially released under FOIA in early 2025, read as follows. Patient presents with severe protein-calorie malnutrition consistent with prolonged inadequate dietary intake. Bilateral peripheral neuropathy, evident. Patient reports numbness in both feet and lower legs, consistent with B12 deficiency over extended period. Mild hypothermia on admission, now stabilized. Dental presentation suggests limited dental care for minimum 2 to 3 years. Psychological evaluation indicates profound dissociative amnesia, likely trauma-induced. Patient cannot state her own name, date of birth, or most recent known location. Responds to direct questions in clear, grammatical English. Cognitive function appears intact. Memory architecture appears selectively damaged. Autobiographical memory severely impaired. Procedural and linguistic memory largely preserved. She was admitted to the inpatient psychiatric unit under a Jane Doe designation. Hospital staff gave her a name within the first week, the way they sometimes do with patients who stay long enough. They called her Jane. Over the following 8 months, under the care of staff psychologist Dr. Renata Scholes, Jane began to reconstruct fragments of herself, not linearly, not cleanly. Memory, when it's been fractured by trauma, doesn't come back the way a file restores from a backup. It comes back in pieces that don't always fit. In smells and physical sensations and fragments of image that arrive without context, like photographs from someone else's life. She remembered a lake. She remembered the smell of sulfur, not unpleasant, she said, not threatening. Just present, the way the smell of someone's house is just present when you've lived there long enough. She remembered a sound, deep, rhythmic, geological, the sound the earth makes when you're standing directly above something very hot and very old. She remembered a man. She called him the one who knew about the water. She did not remember the GoPro, not until Dr. Scholes, as part of a visual memory stimulus exercise, showed her a series of photographs of common outdoor equipment in October of 2023. When the photograph of a GoPro appeared on the screen, Jane went completely still. Dr. Schultz noted in her session log, File RSJD 20231018. Patient's affect changed markedly upon viewing image of GoPro camera. Pupils dilated, breathing slowed. Patient remained motionless for approximately 40 seconds. When I asked if she recognized the object, she said, in a flat, even voice, "I left it for someone to find." When I asked where she left it, she said she didn't know. When I asked why she left it, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Because I knew I wouldn't remember, and someone needed to." The cross-reference between Jane Doe SBRMC JD 202305512 and Mara Calloway FBI Cold Case CCU 2022114MC was confirmed on July 23, 2024, 4 days after Cole Maddox pulled the GoPro from the lake shore. Dental records. A birthmark on her left forearm documented in a childhood medical file. Jane was Mara. She had been in Bozeman for 14 months before anyone knew who she was. But when the therapist asked about the GoPro, about what Mara had meant for investigators to find on it, Mara looked at the window for a long time. Then she said, "Watch the last 4 minutes. Don't look at me. Look at what's behind me." The FBI Digital Evidence Laboratory at Quantico received the GoPro on July 22, 2024. The lead analyst assigned to the case was forensic technology specialist Dario Nunez, a 14-year Bureau veteran who had worked media recovery on over 200 federal cases. In a sworn statement filed under FBI Digital Evidence, Report DE 202400724, Nunez described what his team found when they opened the housing and extracted the microSD card. The card itself was physically intact. 5 years of submersion in a thermally active lake environment had caused significant oxidation to the camera's exterior components, but the waterproof seal on the card housing had held. Not perfectly, there was moisture intrusion along one edge that had corrupted approximately 30% of the card's total data architecture. But not everything was gone. The recovered footage totaled 3 hours, 41 minutes, and 58 seconds plus a separate, isolated file that bore no continuous timestamp connection with the rest. 4 minutes and 3 seconds. The first 3 hours and 37 minutes are what you would expect from a graduate student doing exactly what she said she was going to do. Mara narrates temperature readings. She wades in thermal inlet shallows, holding sample collection tubes steady, her gloved hands precise and practiced. She describes stratification layers in the mineral crust with the focused enthusiasm of someone who has been thinking about this data for months. The footage is calm, scientific, unhurried. At 2:09 p.m., the camera captures the moment she locates Vent 4C. Her voice shifts not in volume, but in quality. The way a voice shifts when something expected becomes something real. Unmarked secondary vent, east of the primary cluster. This isn't in the NPS data. The crust formation. Look at this layering. This is significantly older than the primary system. This is something new. She films it for 4 unbroken minutes. She plants the orange flag. At 2:17 p.m., the footage ends. And then the second file. Forensic analysis of the file header's thermal degradation coefficient placed its estimated recording date between late 2021 and mid-2022, 14 to 30 months after the first file ended. The location metadata was 73% corrupted. Partial GPS coordinates placed it within a 3-kilometer radius of the Vent 4C site. Nunez noted in his report, the environmental audio profile of File 2 is consistent with a subsurface or semi-enclosed geological space. Echo characteristics suggest a confined area with reflective stone or mineral walls. This is not an outdoor environment. The first 90 seconds of the final 4-minute file are complete darkness. No visual information, only audio. And the audio is difficult to describe simply. It is low, rhythmic, patient. FBI audio analysts submitted it for spectral analysis under lab reference ANA 2024DE0091. Their finding: Primary frequency band consistent with deep geothermal convection at close proximity subsurface thermal fluid movement through a confined mineral channel. Overlaid secondary acoustic event, possible human respiratory activity. Source of secondary event, indeterminate. The sound the Earth makes when it breathes. At 1 minute and 34 seconds, a light source activates. Small, directional, a headlamp most likely. The camera is pointing upward. What comes into view slowly as the headlamp finds its range is a ceiling. Stone, mineral crusted. Irregular, not carved, natural. The ceiling of a space that was not built but formed a void in the geological structure above the thermal system, accessible evidently from below. A cave. At 2 minutes and 11 seconds, something moves at the left edge of the frame. It is visible for 3.7 seconds, according to frame-by-frame analysis conducted by the FBI's Visual Information Unit. It is large. It is backlit by a second light source that enters the frame at the same moment the shape does. It is not Mara. The silhouette profile is consistent with an adult of significant height 6 feet or above, standing partially turned away from the camera. 3.7 seconds. Then the frame shifts away. At 3 minutes and 44 seconds, Mara's face appears directly in front of the lens. She is gaunt. Her cheeks are hollowed. Her eyes are clear. She is not afraid. She is deliberate. She speaks directly into the camera. Her voice is low and even. The partial audio recovery, processed under FBI Audio Recovery Protocol EAR4, yields the following. The vent goes deeper than the survey captured. It connects to a subsurface chamber. He doesn't know I still have. If you're watching this, the name is. The audio cuts at 3 minutes and 58 seconds. The final 5 seconds of footage show one image and one image only. The orange trail flag, standing in pale mineral sediment, filmed from below, pointing upward toward it. The flag fills most of the frame. Then black. A trail flag is a marker. It means, I was here. It means, this is significant. It means, someone should come and look at this. Mara had been trying to leave a trail for 5 years. The only person who could explain those final 4 minutes was a woman who couldn't remember recording them, but someone else could. Someone who had been in that cave. Someone whose name Mara's lips had almost formed before the footage cut away. Investigators began to notice a pattern long before they had a name to put to it. In the weeks following the GoPro recovery, Agent Donna Lark's team ran a parallel review of the original 2019 case file alongside the new forensic material. They were looking for the connective tissue, the thing that explained not just Mara's disappearance, but the silence that followed it. 11 days of search, and nothing found. 4 years of cold leads. A FOIA request denied. A postcard with no fingerprints. These things don't happen by accident. They happen when someone is paying attention. The FBI audio team's partial recovery of the name on the final footage, processed and processed again through every available isolation protocol, yielded a high probability match to 2 syllables. The GWU forensic linguistics specialist, contracted by the Bureau, was careful in her language. She said, high probability, not certainty. First syllable, pat or patch. Second syllable, consistent with a hard T or CH terminal sound. Patch. Or Patchett. Dr. Glenn R. Patchett, 54 years old, tenured associate professor of environmental geoscience at the University of Montana, Mara's thesis advisor. The man who had been on the phone when she didn't check in. The man who had passed a polygraph in 2019 and been eliminated as a person of interest in Phase 1. Investigators began pulling thread. What they found, slowly, was a second life running parallel to the first. Before his university appointment, Patchett had spent 11 years as a senior research geologist at a private firm called Venter Applied Sciences, LLC, a Bozeman-based company specializing in applied geothermal energy research. During his time at Venter, Patchett had been the lead researcher on 2 provisional patent applications relating to hydrothermal vent extraction technology on federally managed land in Wyoming and Montana. Both patents had lapsed. The commercial opportunity they represented had not. A federal warrant issued by the U.S. District Court of Montana on August 4, 2024, case number MTFW 2024-08441, signed by a federal magistrate at 11:42 p.m., authorized the search of 3 locations: Dr. Patchett's university faculty office in Missoula, his private residence on the city's south side, and a 3rd property, a hunting cabin outside Gardner, Montana, registered not in his name but in the maiden name of his wife, Claire Voss Patchett. The university office and the residence yielded evidence of interest. The cabin yielded something else entirely. The team that executed the Gardner warrant arrived at 6:15 a.m. on August 9, 2024. The assigned detective described the scene in his field notes with unusual brevity for a 17-year law enforcement veteran. He wrote 1 sentence before the itemized inventory began. The cabin smelled like sulfur. We were 40 miles from any thermal activity. Inside the cabin, investigators documented the following: a hand-drawn topographic map of the Shoshone Lake thermal vent system tacked to the wall above the work table, detailed, annotated, clearly produced by someone with professional geological training. On the map, in red marker, 1 vent site was circled, labeled Vent 4C. Alongside the map, a series of handwritten journal entries spanning from late 2019 through September 2022. The entries are not confessional. They do not read like a man processing guilt. They read like a man managing a problem, calculating, controlled. The entry dated September 3, 2022, the last one reads, "She knows too much, and she won't leave it alone. I thought removing the data would be enough." In a drawer beneath the work table, a prepaid burner phone. Inactive, battery dead. Sent to the FBI Digital Evidence Lab and partially recovered. Its final outgoing text message, sent to an unregistered number on an unregistered prepaid device, read 1 word: done. A secondary item recovered from a locked metal box beneath a floorboard in the cabin's back room was a single micro SD card, same format as the card used by Mara's GoPro, Hero 7, visually blank. But forensic ghost data recovery conducted under FBI Protocol FGD 202408 found traces of video file encoding consistent with GoPro Hero 7 generation. The card had been wiped, but traces remained. Patchett had a copy of some of the footage. He had tried to erase it. What the detective found in that room told them where Mara had been, but it also told them something they hadn't expected, that Glenn Patchett had not been working alone. Dr. Glenn R. Patchett was arrested at his Missoula residence at 7:22 a.m. on September 2, 2024. Exactly 5 years, 11 days, and some hours after Mara Calloway had signed her name at the Shoshone Lake Trailhead Register and walked into the backcountry with a camera on her shoulder. He was charged with 3 federal counts: unlawful imprisonment under 18 U.S. Code Section 1201, obstruction of a federal investigation under 18 U.S. Code Section 1519, and conspiracy to suppress federally protected geological survey data under Title 43 of the United States Code. 8 days later, September 10th, a second arrest. Marcus Vail, 61 years old, former senior partner at Venter Applied Sciences, LLC, charged as co-conspirator. Vail had maintained his connection to Patchett's research through a shell company registered in Nevada, a company that, on paper, provided geological consulting services, and that had made 7 wire transfers to a personal account associated with Patchett between 2019 and 2022. The trial began in August of 2025 at the federal courthouse in Missoula before the Honorable Judge Elaine M. Saraway, U.S. District Court, District of Montana. case number MTCR 202400311. The prosecution's opening statement lasted 1 hour and 40 minutes. The defense's opening statement lasted 50 minutes and consisted, in large part, of the argument that the evidence was circumstantial, that the GoPro footage was degraded and partially unrecoverable, and that Dr. Patchett had never been charged with any act of physical harm. Then, the GoPro was admitted as Exhibit A. The jury requested to view the footage twice during the trial, including the final 4 minutes and 3 seconds, including the shape at the edge of the frame, including Mara's face, gaunt and calm and deliberate, speaking directly into the lens. The forensic evidence included Patchett's cabin journal, the ghost data recovered from the wiped microSD card, digital access logs showing Patchett had accessed Mara's field location files from his university computer on the morning of September 14, 2019 at 10:49 a.m., 3 hours after she had signed in at the trailhead, and vehicle toll and GPS records placing Patchett personally in the Yellowstone backcountry on 3 separate occasions between 2019 and 2022, using a vehicle registered to Venter Applied Sciences. He had been going back. Then, Mara testified. She entered the courtroom on September 18, 2025. She walked without assistance. She wore a gray jacket and her hair was pulled back. She did not look at Patchett. She sat in the witness chair and was sworn in, and she began. Her testimony lasted 41 minutes. She spoke quietly, without notes, in the same precise, methodical way she used to narrate into a camera in the field. She described locating vent 4C. She described what she found below the surface, accessed through a natural fissure in the vent's western wall, a fissure that was only navigable during a specific thermal cycle. When the pressure temporarily equalized, she described the chamber beneath, the scale of it, the formations. She described Patchett arriving. She described the years that followed in a way that the court transcriptionist later said she would never forget, not because it was graphic, because it was so precise, so deliberately stripped of anything that wasn't fact, as if Mara had decided that the facts alone were enough, and that they were, and they were. She said, "I knew I wouldn't remember everything. I knew he might find me again. So I put everything I could on that card, and I put it somewhere he would never think to look. The lake. Because the lake was always where it started." The jury deliberated for 14 hours and 37 minutes. On October 14, 2025, the verdicts were delivered. Glenn Patchett, guilty on all 3 counts. Marcus Vail, guilty on the conspiracy charge, acquitted on 2 others. Sentencing was entered on December 3, 2025. Patchett, 22 years, federal custody. Vail, 9 years, federal custody. In the courtroom, as the verdicts were read, the journalist covering the trial for a regional Montana outlet described the silence as unlike any verdict silence she had experienced in 12 years of court reporting. She wrote, "It wasn't the held-breath silence before a verdict, it was the silence after. Like everyone needed a moment to exist in the world this verdict had just created." But even as the verdicts were read, one question the question Agent Lark had circled on her very first day on the case, the question that the entire trial had orbited without ever entering, remained completely unanswered. What was at Vent 4C that was worth all of this? Mara Calloway, as of the time this video was made, is alive. She lives in a location she has asked not to be disclosed. She is in ongoing recovery, physical and psychological, both under the continued care of a medical team she has also asked not to be named. She has resumed limited academic work, not fieldwork, not geology, something quieter, she has indicated through her family's attorney, something that doesn't require her to go outside. Her mother, Diane, said in a brief public statement released in November of 2025, "She's here, that's enough, that's everything." The Shoshone Lake Backcountry Trail was temporarily closed in late 2024, while the NPS and the U.S. Geological Survey conducted a formal reassessment of the southeastern thermal vent cluster, the area Mara had been researching when she disappeared. The survey team included 3 USGS senior geologists and 2 specialists, contracted from a university consortium. Their findings have not been publicly released. An NPS spokesperson, when asked specifically about Vent 4C, confirmed only that the site is of ongoing scientific and federal interest. When pressed, the spokesperson said, "We're not in a position to comment on that at this time." They were not in a position in 2019 either. The provisional patent documentation from Venter Applied Sciences, LLC, referenced multiple times during the trial, remains sealed under a federal protective order with no public expiration date. Whatever is at Vent 4C, the government has decided you don't need to know about it yet. Maybe ever. The GoPro Exhibit A, U, S, V, Patchett and Vale, was released from federal evidence custody in January of 2026. It was returned through the U.S. Attorney's Office to the Calloway family. Kayla Calloway made one social media post about it. A photograph. The GoPro, sitting on a shelf in her apartment, leaned against a small potted plant. No filter, no caption, just the image, and, beneath it, 2 words. Still here. The anonymous postcard mailed from Bozeman, June 11, 2023, reading, "She saw Vent 4C. So did he," was never connected to a named individual. The partial DNA profile lifted from the envelope remains unmatched in CODIS. Agent Lark has not closed that thread. In a brief comment made to a federal court observer in December 2025, she said only, "There was a third person paying attention to this case. We haven't found them yet." A third person who knew about Vent 4C. A third person who, at some point in 2023, decided to tip the scales. A third person who has still never been identified. Somewhere in Yellowstone's southeastern backcountry, approximately 1.9 miles east-southeast of the established Shoshone Lake Trail, there is a pale mineral flat where the thermal sediment is soft and pale, and the air carries the smell of sulfur and copper. There may be an orange trail flag still standing somewhere near it, faded, weathered, but upright. A marker, still pointing at something. Mara Calloway spent 5 years in the dark, and she came back with almost nothing. No memory she could fully trust. No fully recovered health. A case closed in law but open in almost every other way that matters. What she came back with, in the end, was a small black camera and the foresight to leave it somewhere it could be found. A 26-year-old woman alone in a cave beneath a geological system old enough to predate human language, and she thought clearly enough, carefully enough, to leave a message. To trust that someone would come. The park is still there, 2.2 million acres. The vents breathe in and out on a cycle that was ancient before we had words for ancient. And somewhere in the data recovered from that micro SD card, in the 3.7 seconds of footage showing a shape at the edge of the frame, backlit and unnamed, there is still something that no analyst, no specialist, no federal investigator has been able to fully explain. Not the shape itself. Not the sound beneath it. Not what Mara was about to say before the audio cut away. Some trails lead back, and some were never meant to be walked. Some trails lead back, and some were never meant to be walked. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. A new disappearance every week. Dark Trails.